Captain, we have them. We've established Transporter Lock, the Star Trek Discovery podcast. Join Ken and Sabriel each week as they explore strange new episodes, seek out new plots and new characters, and boldly go where no podcast has gone before.
Hello and welcome to Transporter Lock episode number 81 for November 2021. I'm your co-host, Chief Engineer Ken Gagney.
I am Captain Sabriel Maston. Now that's an intro.
Hey Sabriel, how are you?
I'm doing well. I feel like I talked about Star Trek for an hour already.
It's true. We just recorded an episode about Discovery Season 4, Episode 1, which will be airing shortly after this episode that we are now recording, which is about Star Trek Prodigy, the animated series collaborated by Nickelodeon and Paramount. Sabriel, this show was framed as like either being for kids or being family friendly. Neither you nor I have kids. We have been kids, but we don't have a younger audience with whom to watch and appreciate this show.
I am, however, usually family friendly.
That's not true. Every time we mention that this is an uncensored podcast, anyway, that's neither here nor there. So, former guest of the show, Velda, pointed out that maybe we should have some representation on this show from the target audience for Star Trek Prodigy. And so please join me in welcoming Lieutenant Junior Grade in Ops, Kraft. Hello, Kraft.
Howdy, how y'all doing today?
Good, how are you?
Hey, great. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so Kraft, you and I are distant coworkers. This is pretty much our first interaction, even though we've been at the same company for many years. Tell us a little bit about yourself and also your history with Star Trek.
Sure, yeah. So I'm down in Austin, Texas, with my wife and I and our 6 daughters. Their age range is from 3 years old to 12. And yeah, basically that consumes a good chunk of my life. The kind of the fun, my own little guilty pleasure has been Star Trek over the years. I would say started off with Next Generation as a kid, watching that in syndication. And then I guess first run also, and then got into Deep Space Nine and Voyager. And by that point, I was definitely a closet Trekkie, keeping up with everything, but not realizing there was a broader world of people who liked Trek. So I think it wasn't until working at the company we're at now that I realized that other people like Star Trek, and being in the same Slack channel and diving in more there. But yeah, kind of a generation of that Next Generation and onward timeline. The original series was never really my jam, but give me Deep Space Nine any day and I will be happy.
Yes, we are of a like mind on that. I was just telling Bree how the original series is the only Star Trek I've not seen in its entirety. I just haven't felt motivated. But Deep Space Nine, with its serial storytelling, which was unheard of in the late 90s, just such a phenomenal series. The rotating cast of characters, the evolution, just a wonderful series. Does that make that your favorite?
I think so, and I think a combination of that serial storytelling, but still with 20 plus episodes a season, so they could have that serial storyline, but still deviate for some of those kind of throwaway episodes that are good for character development, but not much else, as well as a little bit of kind of more dark tones. I think In the Pale Moonlight might be one of my favorite episodes. Just that, war is not pretty. Even the good guys are messy during war, and I think that's a very realistic message that was good to hear in Star Trek.
Yeah, I know that Star Trek is largely about optimism and not a dystopian future, but I think it behooves us to put humanity in those realistic situations so that we can empathize with the characters and see how they do come out the other side. Star Trek Deep Space Nine is one of the first shows in this franchise that really did that.
And what I liked about it, in addition, is the good guys, be it the Federation, Cisco, they reflected upon their deviations from their ideals. It wasn't a acceptance that we always must fail to reach our ideals, but still they wrestled with that conversation a lot of what have we done? What are we doing? This may be the best of multiple evils, but we're still trying our best. I liked that it still tried to have that moral utopia angle, but while being realistic simultaneously.
And like you said, Discovery and Deep Space Nine both grapple with serious threats, but Deep Space Nine, by having more than twice as many episodes per season, had more space for character development. I think I saw a tweet recently that Discovery is oh my God, the world is going to end. We have to do something to stop it. And Captain Sisko was like, oh my God, the world's going to end, but we still have time for baseball.
Exactly.
Death to the opposition.
Going to the holodeck with a 1960s Vegas star, right?
Exactly, yes. And do you still watch the newer Treks like Picard, Discovery, and Lower Decks?
Oh yes, absolutely. I then Lower Decks grew on me. I would say the first couple episodes I wasn't too sure of it, but by the end of it, it might actually be my favorite modern Trek. If I'm going to tell you a secret that I hope you won't tell anyone else. I really enjoyed Lower Decks once I got into it, and once I found my rhythm with it. Not only it finding its own rhythm.
What is it that you like about it so much?
I would say, unlike Picard and unlike Discovery, which you what we just talked about, it has more levitate to it. It's a little bit softer, a little bit funnier. Picard and Discovery, if you walk away for 5 minutes, you need to rewind 10 minutes because you missed 30% of the world. It seems like. Whereas Lower Decks, it's a fun watch. And these days, a lot of the times, my TV time is meant to be more relaxing and less stressful. And Lower Decks fits that role really, really well. So I think it reminds me of old Trek, but with modern clothes on.
Yeah, and Lower Decks, similar to Prodigy and the animated series back in the 70s, the animated Star Treks are the only ones that are a half an hour long, other than short treks. And so it's just easier to squeeze it in, which I imagine you don't have a lot of time for Star Trek. So being able to just sit down for 20 minutes and have an entire story must be very appealing.
Yeah, I mean, I could go for it being an hour. I think I enjoyed enough, but that said, like, I can't complain that I can squeeze one in at 10:30 at night and still get a good night's sleep. So I'll take that.
And you've been trying to get your kids into Star Trek for years, is that right?
Oh, for years. I think when my youngest was my oldest was 2 or 3, and I was a stay-at-home dad with her, I would try to like put on some of the Next Generation episodes during our like kind of screen time together, and ever since then, it has never, never, never taken root. And to my chagrin, my oldest and therefore the other kids have fallen in love with Star Wars. So they are huge, huge Star Wars fans, way beyond anything I ever knew about that franchise, even though it was never my fandom. But they've watched every movie, they've watched every animated show, they've read every book they could find, every graphic novel. They have consumed everything Star Wars, but for the life of me, I have not got them into Star Trek.
I mean, I can totally understand preferring one to the other, but I'm surprised that somebody who likes Star Wars that much wouldn't find anything of interest in Star Trek. What was their objection?
I think it was always seen as something older to them. Like for example, with The Mandalorian, my kiddos wanted to watch it because of Star Trek. The older ones wanted to watch it because it's being Star Wars. But seeing the Baby Yoda, as they still call him, that really sucked in the younger ones, and they didn't care about the storyline. They just wanted to see the child make cute faces. Star Trek, I don't think, had some kind of hook that brought in the younger kids in the same way, and so I think a lot of it is just I could not find the right entry point for them to get a little bit of Star Trek and realize that the series is interesting and fun and accessible to them. And that's, I think, the tough part with with like Next Generation. That first season of NGN TNG, sorry, the first season is really cringe and really rough to watch. Mm-hmm. And so, how do you get a 10-year-old into it long enough to get sucked in? And that's been the thing. I haven't found that right sweet spot yet.
Yeah, I mean, I can appreciate that. I, as a kid, didn't have Star Trek action figures. I had Yoda and Luke Skywalker. And even with the prequel trilogy, I believe that's one of the reasons they introduced Jar Jar Binks, was appealed to a younger audience. Whether or not that worked is debatable. But Bree, were you a Star Wars fan as a kid?
I didn't watch Star Wars until I was about 13 or so. I can't believe your daughters weren't hooked on Star Trek like I was by scary yellow alien that Worf is fighting in the holodeck when you're like 4, like I had my first experience, or 5, or whatever it was. No,
Yeah.
actually, then hooked me on Star Trek. I didn't watch it for a few years later. But
Brie, I think you and I may have had similar experiences where we were drawn to the macabre. Like, I really liked Doctor Who as a kid, the Tom Baker series. And my mom was like, I don't understand how little 4-year-old Kenny watched that and didn't have nightmares. It was terrifying, but I was just fascinated by it. So maybe we're drawn to the more serious, not necessarily the darker, but we don't need. I mean, I liked Bugs Bunny and Garfield as a kid too, but I don't know. Maybe some kids just don't like the dark stuff as well as the light stuff.
And I think part of it for me also is like, what were the entry points that we had as kids? For me, we never watched movies in my house. We never put movies on and we never went to the movies. But watching, TV, I had a little, 6-inch black and white TV in my room. And so I could pick up Star Trek on syndication on the random side channel at night and watch it myself in my room. Whereas like my kids, their entry point to things are movies often. And I think the Star Wars movies, I think, world build better than the Star Trek movies. The Star Trek movies, I think, sometimes presume that you know a little bit about Star Trek going into it, the Kelvin's timeline notwithstanding. But I think that's major difference between me and them is I never had 2 hours to watch a movie and get sucked in completely and then want to know everything. Whereas that's how they got into Star Wars.
Right. And your oldest kid came out the same year as the first Kelvin Universe Star Trek movie back in 2009.
Yeah.
And so if that was the form of Star Trek that she were to get into, for example, well, there's only 3 movies. The TV show is certainly of the same franchise, but a different timeline. But at that point in her childhood, there were no Star Trek series. So you watch the movie and that's it. And if you want to watch more, you got to go back 20 years and watch reruns of a stodgy old Captain Picard talking about the Prime Directive.
Yep. As good as those episodes are. Yeah, those are great episodes, though. Measure of a Man. Like, this is fantastic.
So good.
So good.
Or Drumhead. Yeah. Like, I'm certainly not dissing those from our perspective, our refined, adult, mature perspective. But I can totally see why a kid wouldn't want to sit around and watch Captain Picard debate ethics and the like.
Who doesn't want to listen to the Klingons and the Federation Council talk about politics in a movie?
Right?
Oh, I can't believe.
Or a Klingon quoting Shakespeare. Oh, fantastic. So it sounds like, however, Prodigy was finally the hook that you were looking for.
It surprised me. I did not expect it. My 12-year-old tries to act like she's 18. She's too cool for everything. And I mentioned there was a new Star Trek cartoon coming out, and she rolled her eyes and her normal thing. But unbeknownst to me, she watched a trailer on her own. And watching the trailer of the series, she can be like, "Hey, Dad, are we going to watch Prodigy together?" And I was like, hell yeah, we are. Sure, let's do it. And so I think that surprised me, and that I thought it was going to be too kiddie for her. But she really is the one that she's most excited about it of all the kids, frankly. But yeah, she watched the trailer and got kind of sucked into it. And it's like, oh, wow, I can see why you like Star Trek, Dad. And it was all off of Prodigy, which I did not expect at all, both by the previews or after watching the episodes, frankly. But it hooked, and it surprised me, but it sure did.
Wow, what is it that she likes about it?
I think a few things. One is it does assume zero prior knowledge. There is definitely the little bits that, the mention of the Kazon and things like that Prodigy brings to the table that I appreciate. But for her, that does nothing for her, but it doesn't really matter for the sake of the story. So I think that's part of it, is there's no ranks to have to figure out what they mean. There's nothing. It was a completely blank slate. Besides, there's some prisoners and there's someone who's imprisoning them, and that's a pretty obvious conflict situation that they're trying to get out of. That was an easy hook to get into without having to know anything else. And I do think the idea of being kids is also appealing. I think she can appreciate and understand the conflict between like Dahl trying to run the show by himself without accepting help from others. That is my daughter on a day-to-day basis all the time. And so I think between no prior knowledge needed and she being able to see herself on the screen more, I think it was enough to really get her in and have her care about these characters.
Do you think that the lack of experience with Star Trek Voyager is a detriment to your kids' experience with this show?
I don't think so. I think so far from what we've seen the first 5 episodes, Janeway is obviously a teacher. I think we can kind of get into some gender theory questions on do they pick the one female captain because it does seem like the stereotypical teacher. We can probably get into that piece of it, but Janeway is presented as a teacher and a guide, and why she is a teacher and why she's a guide and why she's in the Delta Quadrant. None of that really matters for the context of Prodigy if you're watching it just for Prodigy. It helps us as Trekkies get it, but they don't care, and I think that's fine.
Oh, that actually answers a question I had, which was which quadrant this is set in, because I was wondering what a Kazon was doing so far away from home. But if this is the Delta Quadrant, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, they also talked about the Hirogen sector or system.
Yeah, the star system, yeah.
That caught my attention too, and I looked it up online, and apparently the Hirogen don't have a home planet, so it was unclear whether or not this is named after them or vice versa, or if there's any relation.
I don't think it's settled at all. Things have changed or whatever. I think that it's supposed to be things have changed since Voyager was here, but we don't know. They had a home planet, but they didn't anymore. They were nomads, not digital.
Yeah, and who knows? Maybe this is the original star system of their home planet, but at the time their planet was uninhabitable or something like that. I don't think they've established exactly when this is in the timeline. So I know it's obviously post Voyager, and obviously a little bit probably past the Nemesis because of the Protostar ship, but we don't know exactly how far ahead it is either. So I think the role of the diviner and how does the Kazon play into it and what's going on with the erosion, I think there could have been a lot of changes from the Delta Quadrant we know, especially, remember the Borg is devastated after the end of Voyager, so who knows what the Delta Quadrant can become without with the Borg having a kneecap knocked out of them.
I think one reason I thought this was Alpha or Beta Quadrant was because of the Tellarite, which is a species we do know.
That's true.
So that threw me off a little bit. So you said that you didn't think, based on your own experience with Prodigy, that it would be the show to bring your kids in. Does that imply that they like it more than you do?
Yes. I mean, Brie, I think before we started recording, kind of heard a little bit of a exasperated sigh when we mentioned Prodigy and having to watch all 5 episodes. I think if it wasn't for my kids and if it wasn't for me being a Trekkie, would I watch the show? Frankly, probably not. I think it's a show for kids that, calling it family friendly means that it's a kid's show. So thus you can watch in front of your grandmother and she won't be scandalized by what's on the screen. In terms of it being a show that the whole family can sit around and enjoy, I don't know if I'd go that far. So I think, like I said, I think they enjoy it more than I do. And if I didn't have kids, I don't think I would enjoy it much at all, if I'm being completely honest.
I went into this knowing it's not marketed nor made for me, but I'm going to give it a shot because there are cartoons that are not made for me, my age demographic, that I enjoy. I love Avatar: The Last Airbender and Legend of Korra, for example. Just some recent examples. There are cartoons I adore. So I went into this with an open mind. I was so bored with the first episode. I despise the character of Dahl. He's got like main character syndrome, where the problem where everyone else in the show is more interesting than him. And when Ken should we talk about this? And I'm like, after 3 episodes, I was like, Ken, I'm not going to watch any more of this. No interest at all. And,
which is probably the first Star Trek you've ever said that about, right?
Yeah. I said, I'm not going to continue watching this unless I hear something happens later from someone else. But I wasn't going to find out myself.
And did anything happen once I convinced you to watch more episodes to change your mind?
No.
Oh.
There's a neat premise, but no. Maybe when the season is over, something like someone's like, "Oh, this is cool direction with the Protostar." But beyond that, I can wait until someone else tells me. I don't need to binge this, or I don't need to watch this week by week. This can be a show I put on the side while I'm doing something else, like playing a game.
Yeah, when the series first started, it didn't feel very much like a Star Trek show to me. And I was thinking, similar to Kraft, I was asking myself, would I watch this if it wasn't the Star Trek franchise? And I didn't think it was. I especially didn't like that. Like, it seemed very action oriented in the first 2-part pilot, and the action was good. Like, I actually really enjoyed the battle on the hull of the Protostar. I thought that was really cool, but it felt more like the kind of action they were doing to draw in kids that had short attention spans. But as I watched the show some more, I really felt like I got to know the characters better. And I think in some ways, Prodigy is doing more character development than Discovery does. Like, we've talked about how on Discovery, there are still people on the bridge that we know almost nothing about. And Bree and I still sometimes forget their names. Whereas on this show, I feel like, oh, like, I understand this character has these father issues, and this character wants to know where they come from, kind of like Odo did. And this person, is really just a little girl who's scared and wants, she has a lot of strength and she knows how to use that, but she doesn't know what other strengths she might have. And she is going to maybe develop those as the show goes on. I feel like Prodigy is actually doing a pretty good job about that. So yes, there is a main character, and his arrogance is in a way a fatal flaw, but I think it's one that we're going to see him overcome, especially given that the other characters are more interesting. He has some catching up to do.
I thought a lot about that, because I don't like Dahl's character either. I don't care for him at all. But I think it's interesting your point about character development, because also at this age group, especially for kids, developing the character really, I think, is a good trait for a show to have as a parent. Letting one of my kids to see it, and I think it's been good to see Dahl be such an arrogant jerk and then have to fall back to Janeway's help or his team's help, or realize that he's wrong. I think that's been a good thing to see as a parent watching kids watch the show, knowing that there's going to be plenty of people in my kids' lives or my kids themselves that are dull at times. And so I think it's interesting, the point about character development, because I think you're right, but I also think that's really more of the point of the show than the storyline of where the protostar goes, so to speak.
When I watched the episodes, up until my two favorite characters in this are Janeway and Gwyn, because they're the most interesting to me. By the third episode, the only time I found myself paying attention was when Janeway was on screen, close attention. Gwyn and her difficulty with Dad, interesting to me. But so basically, those are the only two. I'm like, awesome, more of them. Gwyn should be captain, barring the whole trying to get back home to Dad at the first half of the show.
Yeah, I really like Gwyn's character because she and Dahl are so diametrically opposed in their family relationships. Like, Dahl doesn't know where he comes from and he wants to find out, whereas Gwyn is dealing with, I think, is a more relatable situation, which is she knows where she comes from, but she doesn't fit in. She wants her father to love her in a way he's not capable of. She can't be for her father what he wants her to be. Acknowledging that, and then the next step of accepting that, is really hard. And we get to see some of that when she saw the apparition of her father and he loved her and accepted her. That's how she knew he was fake. And that's really hard. And I love that dynamic. And also the fact that he's not 100% bad. Like, there was actually a moment of conflict where he wasn't sure whether to save his progeny or the protostar. And he actually had to think about that. He made the wrong decision, but he had to think about it.
He had to think about it. Says novels.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, well, I agree. I think what would help the show the most is if the idea of Dahl as captain falls off. I think that makes it really less interesting in that he is so arrogant and, he thinks he's in charge. I would love to see the group be more a group with Gwyn and Dahl and Zero and all of them playing their strengths towards solving the problem and less of a hierarchy. But that's, I think, to see how that will play out in the next half of the season will be interesting to me if they address that at all.
Well, Kraft, you and I supposedly come from a company with a flat hierarchy. Do you really think that would work on a starship?
I think with the setup with the kids, I think it could. There's only that small group. There's not a crew per se. I think there's a lot more room for consensus in a 5-person ship than there is with a, what was the crew in the Enterprise, like 1100 or something like that. So I think there's a lot of differences between a starship as we think of it in the Trek universe. This is more like the Millennium Falcon with a few characters on it, where Solo will still listen to advice even though he's the one in charge. Until Dahl starts listening to advice more, I think it's going to be kind of a boring repetition. So hopefully they do advance that some.
Yeah, I think him mending things with Gwyn is a good first step, because I think she is one of the most mature characters, and also, given the training that she received from her father, the most knowledgeable about the starship. And I think that if Dahl starts to appreciate that and use it, then we're going to see a better run ship. So whether that means Gwyn should be captain or Gwyn should be number one, either way, Dahl cannot continue to operate as independently as he has been.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think and to me, for the show, it's interesting as an adult, knowing that there is something I look forward to with the second half of the season. I want to see how these characters develop now that there's this point of reconciliation or potential for reconciliation between Gwyn and the entire crew, but especially Dahl.
Yeah. To Bree's point, I do like the character of Janeway. She is this interesting midway between an automaton of a hologram and somebody who's fully self-actualized, like the Doctor from Voyager, because she knows she's a hologram. Like, she even asks herself at one point, what would the real Janeway do? And we haven't seen a lot that refers back to Voyager, or to our earlier discussion requires that you have seen Voyager. But I like that we have a familiar character as an entry point for those of us who do know Star Trek. And also, supposedly, Chakotay is coming back in some capacity.
Yep.
Yeah, he's listed as a guest star, so I would hope so.
I don't know what that means, if he's also going to be a hologram, or like what would he be doing in the Delta Quadrant. But I'm looking forward to, I mean, there are a lot of mysteries here. Like, what is the protostar doing there? Why does it have an actual protostar? How fast can it go without turning people into lizards? And why does it have 2 warp cores, other than just that it's twice as cool?
I mean, Voyager had 2 warp cores, but they kept forgetting about that.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yep.
Huh. Was it just like a backup?
Yeah, but they forgot about it all the time to show the point that you didn't even know they had it. But yep, they had 2 warp cores.
Huh. Interesting.
I just thought Jason Alexander is also going to appear, but he's not reprising his role as Kyros from the think tank.
That's just what I was thinking. That's okay. I mean, that's not unusual for actors to come back, but in different roles. Interesting. Speaking of either cameos or whatever, the actor Bonnie Gordon, she plays the voice of the ship's computer, which was totally out of the blue for me, because I know her as part of a musical comedy duo called the Library Bards. I backed their Kickstarter called Bombarded. They do these amazing songs that are riffs on popular songs, but rewritten lyrics to be about like Star Trek or Doctor Who or Spider-Man. Like, I love their album, and I would highly recommend it. I'm going to drop a link in the show notes. She has a new Kickstarter up right now for a independent jazz album. She said that she'd been sitting on these songs for years, and the pandemic made her realize that if something happened to her tomorrow, she wanted to have left this. So she's finally kickstarting and releasing the album. I have backed it. Gonna drop a link to that in the show notes as well. So if you want to back a jazz album by the ship's computer from the Protostar, I highly recommend you do so. Bonnie Gordon. Also, another character I want to mention, Dreadnought, which in my mind is essentially General Grievous from Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Like he is very one-dimensional. He's probably the most one-dimensional character on this show, and I don't know if we really need to know more about him. Like, I don't need to know if he has daddy issues, for example, or maybe he has little dreadnoughts running around that we don't know about, but he's just not interesting to me. Like, I get that kids especially will value having a guy who is entirely bad and isn't conflicted, so that they know when he comes on screen, like, oh, something bad's going to happen, we need to be afraid of him or whatever. But He doesn't do anything for me.
Is he like Skeletor? Like, I'll get you, super boobs.
I mean, I think, isn't he just a android, artificial life form anyhow? So I think as far as everything that you mentioned, the show bringing to the table in terms of character development, I expect the least out of him also in that regard.
Yeah, I don't know if he is biological, cybernetic, somewhere in between. Like maybe that is something we'll find out, and I wouldn't mind finding out more about that. But yeah, I don't think we're going to expect more in the way of psychological character development from Dreadnought.
And I think really what the show does well, or what they're trying to do, is separate the bad guy from being like the intentional bad guy with the diviner, and Dreadnought just being the person that executes for him. He's the, in the was it the classical trope of bullies, where we have the one bully who's the brains of it all, like Biff from Back to the Future, and he just has his little minions that does his bidding for him because he won't do the dirty work. I feel like it's a similar dynamic here, where it's just, we need a couplet or a trio of bad boys to have the bad covered, and he just fills that role.
I feel like the diviner somehow needs to keep Dreadnought in line. Like, Dreadnought has taken aim at both the Protostar and at Gwyn, and he purposely aimed so as to not hurt either one. But I feel like he only did that because the diviner wanted him to, and that if unchained, he would just run rampant and destroy everything just to get his way. So he's potentially a lot more dangerous than we have seen so far.
I am curious to find out how Zero, our Medusan, relates to the Protostar, and why our baddie was so interested in finding Zero.
And also finding the Protostar itself, because did you see how big the Diviner's ship is compared to the Protostar?
It's massive.
Like we're talking like
ship.
Say what?
It's like a Romulan mining ship.
Yes, I was just going to say that we're like talking Nero level ship. Like this is ridiculously huge. And yet somehow he needs the Protostar. Does he want to equip his massive ships with a Protostar drive so he can go invade the Alpha Quadrant with them? I don't know.
He wants to get more cats.
Cats?
Yeah.
The little cat character from the first episode.
Yeah, the little Caitlin.
Oh, yeah. She was cute.
Yeah, like, okay, they gave this person... Every other person on that planet is wearing, like, a suit, and they show the face of this kitten, so, like, they are going back to rescue that kitten at some point.
I thought it was really interesting, and I'd never thought of this, that depriving access to a universal translator is a way to isolate people.
Yeah.
I did appreciate that about the first episode. A lot of the, what the same problems we see with Stargate, if everyone knows English, and at least Star Trek explains it with the translator, but then they pull it away. I thought it was a great reminder to us as viewers who know Star Trek to not take all this technology that we used to take for granted in the series for granted here in Prodigy.
And that's something that Enterprise tried to do by going back to before we had reliable translators, transporters, shields, and it didn't work as well as having that technology available and removing it.
They always had basic versions, right? Like the polarized hull plating, or go get the grappling hook.
Yeah. And then eventually they did start to invent those things because they realized, like, it's really boring to have Hoshi Sato translating for everybody all the time. That's just an obstacle we can remove by inventing the universal translator.
I liked that. But then, but it was we have this, but lower tech, but it does the exact same thing. Like phase cannons.
Yeah, I liked it too, but I'm speaking from the writer's perspective. They clearly saw it as an obstacle. Because they're like, oh, we're so used to writing Voyager where they can just beam around anywhere. What if we removed it? And they're like, oh, wait, this is a terrible idea. We want to go back to writing simply for Voyager.
Mm-hmm.
And you can move technology forward like Discovery does with their transporters and make it interesting. You don't have to remove it to make it interesting.
I think it's also hard, too, with Enterprise. When it came out, we didn't have Google Translate. But now, how amazing our translation abilities are on our phones, that you really can't go back to a time without a translator now and have that be realistic.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I especially love how many pads, PADDS, they had to walk around with to hold all that data. Like, I think there are episodes where you saw Jake Sisko just like stumble and drop a whole mess of pads. We're like, no, that's one iPad.
See, my friend Shar and I have realized that we came to the actualization that no, they were just very hyper specific. Like, this is the one I put my science report on. This is the one I put my doctor. This is the one I write my fanfic on. And so they're very specific. That's why they had them all.
They're siloed from each other because, like,
Right.
I have a work computer and a personal computer.
See?
Yeah.
You know, like, while you and I are podcasting on this machine, I have another one open right next to me looking for urgent coverage and site down notices. Like, I don't want to do that on the same computer. That would be, oh my gosh, no. So I guess you do need multiple pads.
You have to.
I've never owned more than one iPad, though.
Yeah, I got like 6 of them. Every generation I buy, I don't know how I afford this. I don't question it. I put in a credit card. I never worried about it again. I have an iPad for gaming, one for reading Brave browser,
Stop.
one for Safari.
Okay.
I'd say not as bad as Bree, but I have multiple. I have my watching Trek while doing dishes iPad, and I have the iPad the kids play with games, the ones I don't let them play with. It makes sense. Just not quite as bad as Jake carrying 30 at once and dropping them in a pile.
Right. It reminds me of my dad when e-readers were new. He conflated e-reader with e-book. Like he thought that each e-reader had one book on it.
Oh my goodness.
And so, like, you were literally buying an e-book. And so, like, if you want another, like, he knew Barnes and Noble, so I think what was there? The
Nook.
The Nook, thank you. Yeah, so he thought, like, you'd go to Barnes & Noble, you'd buy a Nook, you'd read the book, and if you want another ebook, you'd go to Barnes & Noble and buy another Nook.
Amazon, don't listen to this, because I don't want to see a product like Christmas. Like, now introducing the ebook, where you buy one at a time.
This Nook has a storage capacity of 16 kilobytes. It's amazing. It's like that's less than my Apple II. Come on. Oh, Dad. Anyway, I am looking forward, actually, to Voyager. I'm sorry, Voyager to Prodigy. Actually, that's a good point. Kraft, was it you who said that your kids got a little confused because at one point this living planet made a fake version of Janeway that was mean, and they were like, wait a minute, I thought that lady was nice.
No, I did not say that, but it's true that the whole picture planet kind of effect was really confusing, and it did kind of cross streams on what characters are what, and I don't think they've really had a chance to reconcile what that means yet.
Okay. Yeah, so the first half of the season, and this is something we haven't really seen since the first season of Discovery where they split it in half. Parts 1 and 2, or episodes 1 and 2 were a two-parter, the pilot, and then episodes 4 and 5 were a two-parter. So that gets resolved, which I was glad for, because at the end of episode 4, I'm like, there's 3 minutes left. How are they going to resolve this? And they don't. It was a two-parter, which you've now seen, Kraft, and your kids haven't, so we can spoil that. They do get off the planet, and I'm curious why the planet decided to stop eating Voyager, other than that Janeway released the cleaners. But there was an episode of Voyager, I forget which one. I think it was called Bliss, which was similar in concept to this episode. Does that ring a bell, Bree?
The biomimetic, the material that they sank into and ended up later being a plot point for a different episode.
Was that like the Quicksilver, or what did they call it?
No, I don't think it's that episode. The summary for this episode is Voyager finds a wormhole that leads directly back to Earth, but 7 of 9 suspects that it may not be what it appears.
Yes, I forget the details of it, but yeah, like it was, everyone on the crew was infected by this notion that this is exactly what they were all looking for. And they were getting letters from home saying how great they happy to see them, and Mark hadn't forgotten about Janeway and was ready to marry her again. And like everything they wanted was exactly answered by this alien device that was projecting the wormhole in front of them. That was the episode.
Yeah. And so this is a little bit of a different spin, where they're actually on a planet now, but they're still having all their wishes fulfilled and finding out, like, oh, my dad does love me, or, oh, that's what my parents look like. And I suppose after 800 plus episodes of Star Trek, it's hard to do something entirely original. Yeah. But also, if this is an entry point for younger viewers into the Star Trek franchise, they will not have seen Bliss, which aired February 10th of 1999. Of all the episodes of Voyager, why would that be the one they would have seen?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think in terms of copying the storylines, I think it's fine. I mean, it was different enough, and the kids trying to figure out how to get out of it, and they're on the planet, and it was trapping them in. I think it was different enough that's fine. As a parent watching it, I wasn't necessarily thrilled with the such a quick introduction to you can't trust anyone because you don't know what anyone is kind of line. But again, copying Bliss is fine, I think.
That's a good point about what sort of examples you're setting for kids, because we see Dahl being this arrogant jerk, and he's the protagonist and the captain. And your daughter sees herself in that. Is she seeing that as a role model, or does she more clearly see why those character traits may not work in certain situations?
The latter, in that she has had that happen to herself already, where she'd been overly arrogant and got called out on it and realized that was a problem in her own life. And so I think she sees herself in that not as a positive thing, but seeing more examples of, you know what, like, Dad was right when he got on to me for being a jerk last week because the same thing happened to Dahl kind of logic. I don't see him being gravitated to by my kids as form of a example to replicate, but an example to learn from.
Mm-hmm. That's good, because I remember one friend of mine, she took her kids to see Frozen, the first Disney film. And what one of the kids took away from that movie was conceal, don't feel. Yeah. The movie is supposed to demonstrate that is a harmful attitude and that you need to not do that. But anytime the kid was like feeling bad after that movie, she'd just be like, don't let anybody know, just conceal, don't feel. And like, that's a discussion the parents need to have. Like, no,
yeah,
please feel, please express, don't bottle things up. Toxic masculinity, femininity, don't do that.
Yeah, this is not a Disney podcast, but I actually really don't like Frozen 1 at all. Frozen 2 I enjoy quite a bit, but that first Frozen, there were so many problems with it that I'm glad my kids don't want to watch it anymore.
Even the youngest has outgrown it?
Yeah, Frozen 2, that's where it's at in terms of the Frozen franchise with all the kids.
Cool. We'll have to launch a Disney podcast next. Have you back on.
Go for it.
Sounds good.
Any closing remarks about Prodigy?
I guess you know my closing thoughts already. I've already said them.
So you're not going to watch the remaining 5 episodes as they air, which I think starts in January, maybe after Discovery Season 4 ends. Mm-hmm. But maybe someday you'll binge it?
Maybe someday I'll put it on a second monitor if I hear something interesting happens.
Or one of your many pads.
Yes, on one of my 17. I bought a couple more while we were talking. iPads. It should be here by end of day.
And what about you, Kraft? You and your family?
We're going to keep watching it. I think it is not a show for me, but it's a show that I can watch with the kids. And so as long as I go into it, just having no expectations, besides a fun half an hour with my kids watching the same show together, it's going to be a good watch. And so as long as I still have my DS9 I can rewatch again, I'll be happy with my Trek itch. But it's a good show, and it's good for kids. And so far, I'm going to keep watching it.
Yeah, there are some Star Trek-related mysteries that I'm eager to see solved. And I think while I'm on that journey, I'm going to see some character development that I'll enjoy.
To add to my final thoughts, I am glad this exists. I am so glad that it can be an introductory for a new generation, the next generation of viewers. I am glad it exists, and I have no problem that it is content that is not made for me. I hope it does very well, and I hope maybe in that doing very well, something will happen where it makes me go like, give it a second shot.
It's been picked up for a second season, so we're gonna have more of it either way.
It's true.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be for us, but a lot of the communities I subscribe to, whether it's Star Trek or Contra Dancing, require that we bring in new members in order for the community to stay alive. And this is one way to do that. So I'm excited about that. Kraft, remind our listeners, if they want to follow you and your musings, whether they are WordPress or Star Trek related, where they might find you online.
You can find me, my social media of choice is Twitter. So I'm twitter.com/craft, like the cheese. But no relation to the food company, despite what many Twitter folks think. And you can read my blog online at craft.blog.
Awesome.
You can read my blog at craftfoods.blog.
No, don't go confusing our listeners.
I'm like the cheese, but better, okay? No relation to the food company.
I gotta tell you, I spent a semester working in a scientific laboratory in Melbourne, Australia, right across the street from a craft factory. And I knew which bus stop to get off at when I could smell the Vegemite.
That's amazing.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Kraft. I will see you at work. Everybody else can find you on Twitter and on your blog. Links will be in the show notes. Until next time.
Oh, I don't have a closeout for this. Go, punch it. I wasn't expecting this. Let's go.
Just eloquent as always.
Sounds like
As
dolls.
always. Sorry, my iPad order came in. I was just caught off guard.
Yeah, what is it that doll says?
I don't want to listen to anybody.
If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on iTunes and keep your hailing frequencies open by following us on Twitter @TransporterLock or subscribing to our podcast and email newsletter at transporterlock.com.